Did you give that child anything?
Not a thing. I don't think I even went in the room. I'm really going to sneak back on the ward and say, oh, here, I'll have a bit of this. No matter how much you don't believe me, and I know you don't, I don't care. I can't bloody lie to you. I'm not going to sit here and lie to you for days on end while I get questioned.
Beverley Allitt was born in 1968, growing up in Corbry Glen near Grantham on this estate. She was one of 4 children to her parents, and her father remained in the house until she grew up, but he's now passed away. She was unable to pass the exams for Stephen Grammar School and attended Charles Reed Secondary Modern, which was about 5 minutes from her house when I did it. She was known as a local babysitter, but a bit of a sickly child, and didn't often attend school, possibly as often as she should have done, due to the fact that she was always making some complaint of being ill, not always substantiated by GPs or doctors. After she'd left Charles Reed Academy, she then went on to Grantham College to begin training as a nurse. During this time, she had a boyfriend, and they could be regularly seen at their local pub, which was the Fighting Cocks. However, he also did mention that he was quite scared of her at times. She was a very strange lady. She was quite volatile, and despite all of these medical conditions which she claimed to have, she would often hit him, make claims that she was pregnant by him, not through her own choice, and that he'd forced himself on her. And again, none of these claims could be substantiated at all. While she worked in a nursing home doing her nurse training in the Grantham area, there was lots of reports of faecal matter being found over walls and being found stored in the employee fridges. And colleagues found her very odd in general, because she used to claim that the faecal matter was an act of a poltergeist, when in fact it was likely her just smearing it over the walls and for some reason putting it in a fridge. Beverley didn't pass her nursing course, and she consistently failed exams, lacked attendance, blaming it all on being sick, and she was the only person on the course who could not find employment, having been rejected from multiple applications. On the 5th of December 1990, Beverley Allitt, who was completing her training as a state-enrolled nurse, was interviewed by Grantham Hospital, which was recruiting for adult wards, and all the trainees who were interested in her post were accepted except for Allitt. Since she'd taken considerable sick leave during her training period, in fact it was over 100 days, Beverley Allitt was required to work on wards for a further 10 weeks after completing her written exams, and she asked to work on Ward 4, which was the children's ward, and the sister of the ward, who we'll call Sister B, and Allitt's manager agreed. She worked on Ward 4 for 10 weeks from December 1990. Up until this point, significant risk factors were overlooked due to poor staffing levels for all clinical levels of output and poor leadership, as was found in later inquiries. And despite the obvious issue of not being qualified for the position, the following medical record held absolutely no concern. So bear in mind she's probably about 18 around this time that the medical record has been extracted. So 1985, injury from kicking a door. February 24th, 1986, injury to right middle finger. July 86, consulted GP after missing 2 periods, insisting she must be pregnant, negative tests. August 1986, injury to toe from kicking door. October 1986, 3 appointments to complain of abdominal pain, claims she has 2 ulcers, gastroscope shows no sign of ulcer and staff conclude she's making herself sick. October, again, 1986, report from obstetrician that she's having issues, but the gynae can't find any problems. December 1st to the 12th, 1986, issues with right hand, complaints of eating fat, gallbladder investigations carried out. The surgeon writes that they feel that the symptoms are psychosomatic. So in 2 years, she's been seen by a clinician on average about 16 times, and some of those conditions have had multiple investigations. And then in 1988 she starts training as a nurse, and then of course her complaints become more complex because she has now a little bit of medical knowledge. So she starts her placement at Pilgrim Hospital in 1990, the early part in January. Between starting a nurse training and, in fact, starting a placement at Pilgrim, she's been seen on average a further 9 times. And then she starts her placement at Ward 4 in Grantham at the end of 1990. And her records show that, in fact, investigations show that she has hysterical symptoms and she has got significant issues. But none of this was picked up and none of it was deemed a concern. Generally all down to possibly poor due diligence, but also down to the fact that there was such a severe shortage of staff on the nursing wards that it became possibly a secondary concern to actually having boots on the ground. On 21st of February 1991, Liam Taylor was 7 weeks old when he was admitted to Ward 4 and diagnosed as suffering from bronchiolitis. On the 23rd of February 91, he collapsed suddenly and required emergency resuscitation. He'd stopped breathing for an estimated hour and a quarter. Though his heart had started beating again and he was breathing on a ventilator, he showed no other signs of life. He began to suffer severe convulsions, which the consultant judged as indicating he'd suffered severe brain damage, and his parents sadly asked for Liam to be taken off the ventilator and the drugs, and he died that afternoon. The consultant's death certificate indicated the cause of death as probable septicemia, so some sort of infection, but the coroner rejected this and instructed the pathologist at Grantham Hospital to conduct a post-mortem. The consultant protested, insisting that if there was to be a post-mortem it should be conducted by a paediatric pathologist. This was ignored, and the post-mortem disclosed that the heart was damaged and a symptom of heart attack extremely rare in children. The pathologist found no cause for the attack and recorded that Liam had died of a myocardial infarction. The consultant challenged this finding and gave the opinion there should be a second post-mortem. However, the coroner had signed the death certificate and was not prepared to order a second one. The consultant contacted a paediatric pathologist at another hospital who agreed to look at the samples of the tissue, and it appears that the hospital pathologist did not send off those samples. Subsequently, when a photograph of Liam's heart was discovered by the police and examined by the paediatric pathologist, he confirmed the cause of death as a myocardial infarction, but attributed it to asphyxiation or poisoning. Less than 3 weeks later, Timothy Hardwick attended on the 5th of March 1991, and he was 11 years old, suffering from severe cerebral palsy. He died within 3 hours of admission to Ward 4. The cause of death was recorded as status epilepticus, although there was no evidence that he'd been suffering a fit prior to his collapse. 10 days later, on the 10th of March 1991, Kaylee Desmond, who was 15 months old, was admitted to Ward 4 with a chest infection and vomiting history, collapsed twice and was transferred to Queen's Med in Nottingham. The x-rays of her chest, which revealed traces of air which should not have been there, was sent on to a radiologist for examination. 10 days after, on 20th of March 1991, Paul Crampton, who was 5 months old, was admitted to Ward 4 for observation after his doctor had diagnosed bronchiolitis. On the 23rd of March 1991, shortly before he was due to be released, he suffered a hypoglycemic attack while being fed. He suffered 2 subsequent attacks, and after his transfer to another hospital, thankfully Paul recovered without any medication. A blood sample was taken from Paul after the third attack on or about the 28th of March and was sent for analysis, but it only arrived at the laboratory on the 4th of April 1991. At the laboratory, nobody was aware that there was an urgency about the case, so the test for insulin was conducted a week later on the 12th of April 1991. The result of the test was the insulin level was so high that its level could not be measured accurately on the equipment being used. The laboratory rang one of Ward 4's consultants directly with the finding, which indicated an injection of a large amount of insulin. The consultant did raise his concerns at this finding with some of the other staff available at the time, but told them to do nothing but keep watch. Bradley Gibson was aged 5.5 when he was admitted to Ward 4 on the 29th of March 1991, and he was suffering from pneumonia. His parents were called to the hospital and told that his heart had stopped and he'd taken a long time to resuscitate. He was transferred to Queen's Med, again in Nottingham, on the 1st of April 1991. He recovered consciousness and made a remarkably speedy recovery. He suffered symptoms indicative of brain damage, including pains in his legs and loss of control of his bladder. Yikung Chan, on the 31st of March 1991, was 2 years old and collapsed twice and was transferred to Queen's Med. Becky Phillips, on the 4th of April 1991, a baby of 2 to 3 months, was discharged from Ward 4. She stopped breathing during the early hours of the morning and she died before arrival at the hospital. The cause of death was unknown, but was attributed to cot death syndrome. Her twin sister Katie, admitted to Ward 4 for observation, collapsed on 3 occasions and was transferred on the 7th of April to Nottingham City Hospital. Rib fractures in her chest were not remarked on at the time of the x-rays. Another aspect of sadness to this particular victim of Beverley Allitt was that the Phillips baby's mum was just so grateful to Beverley Allitt being on hand and looking after her daughter Katie that she actually asked her to be her godmother, totally unaware that in fact it was Beverley Allitt that had caused the death of Becky. On the 9th of April 1991, Michael Davidson collapsed whilst being given an injection on Ward 4 and required emergency resuscitation. His reaction was attributed to extreme anxiety at being injected. Christopher Peasgood, on the 13th of April 1991, 8-week-old, stopped breathing suddenly on 2 occasions whilst in Ward 4 and was transferred to Queen's Med Hospital. Christopher King, on the 16th of April 1991, aged 5 weeks, had been admitted to Ward 4, coughing and vomiting, and deteriorated with a sudden respiratory attack. He had a third attack before it was decided to transfer him to Queen's Med Hospital in Nottingham, where he recovered. His mother and a nurse in another part of the hospital approached one of the consultants with their criticisms of the way that Ward 4 was run and the absence of emergency equipment. He said that he would write to the manager, who would contact her, and no such contact was ever made. Patrick Elstone, on the 18th of April 1991, was aged 7 weeks and suffered 2 collapses on Ward 4 before being sent to Queen's Med in Nottingham. And finally, Claire Peck, on the 22nd of April, was 15 months old when she entered Ward 4 with severe asthma and died following cardiac arrest. A blood sample revealed a high concentration of potassium. It was the last known victim of Beverley Allitt that's known of at Grantham Hospital, and until the police arrived on the scene, nothing dramatic seemed to occur on Ward 4, apart from maybe a mysterious fire in a mattress on the 29th of April, which could be reminiscent of her behaviours in the care home, which were quite destructive, such as the smearing faecal matter on the walls and keeping the same content in the employee fridge. So on the 30th of April, finally the police were called in, and this was due to junior doctors at Queen's Med Centre at Nottingham and the doctors at Grantham on Ward 4, Dr Porter and Dr Naliakara, and they were doing their best to get the nursing and the management authorities to take the escalated number of events happening there and escalate it and take it seriously. On the 1st of May, Superintendent Clifton visited the hospital for the first time, and he recognised immediately that there was a need for some action to take place, and by examining duty rosters identified Beverley Allitt as the prime suspect, as she was the only person on the staff that had been on shift and present for all of the incidents which had occurred, and she was suspended from duty. However, being suspended from duty did not prevent her from working within the NHS and in other care jobs outside of the NHS, and she continued to work in residential care homes. It does really blow my mind, I know it's the 1990s, that the checks just do not seem to be in place. So somebody is being investigated by the police and they've been suspended from duty from a hospital because of suspicious deaths, is still allowed to have any contact with humans in a caring capacity is just absolutely nuts to me. But that is what happened. Eventually she was sentenced for her crimes, and the difficulty with Beverley Allitt, of course, is there's the issue of whether she has Munchausen's by proxy. So she gets the satisfaction from the attention of making others ill or behaving as though others are ill. And the difficulty comes with her being a self-harmer as well. So if you put her in prison, it's been deemed an absolute that she will self-harm, she'll try and take her own life, and she is a danger to herself and potentially others. So under the Mental Health Act, of course, that means that you can be in detention against your own will. So she's now residing at Rampton Hospital. There's nothing else that they can do with her at this point, but it does kind of validate maybe to her this obsession with being ill and wanting to be ill and having others look after and care for her. So if it was a choice of prison or a mental health institution, I'm not sure which one I would pick, because neither are a particularly good option. And if you're in the mental health system, you don't get a specified time. Your time there doesn't end when your sentence does, because it might be deemed you're still a danger to yourself or the public. You might have been on so many drugs there that it's impossible to come off them. But she seems quite happy with it. And there are reports that she's married now to an equally grim character who's murdered an old lady and is known as a vampire. But the doctors who were involved with the case, they were made redundant because they decided to close Ward 4 and remove the children's ward from Grantham Hospital and relocate that elsewhere. Have an absolutely wonderful term in the UK. Whenever something goes wrong with a government institution, so that might be the NHS, it might be the police, it might be social services, government departments, work and pensions, so on and so forth. An investigation always occurs, and when it's blindingly obvious from the start to everybody else what the failures were, the reports will standard say lessons were learnt. And unfortunately, in the case of Beverley Allitt, lessons haven't been learnt at all. When she first became a nurse in the late 1980s, the 80s saw a massive revolution for the nursing profession as it was. They weren't getting paid enough, they were striking, they're having to battle just to be able to pay their bills and be recognised actually for the training that they've done and for the important job that they do. And now in 2023, the nurses are striking because they don't get paid enough to pay their bills, to have a decent standard of living. And these guys are doing 12-hour shifts non-stop. They've worked through COVID, and anyway, our government still won't give them any money. So have we resolved the problem whereby we are so desperate for nurses that we can do a due diligence, a good background check, or are we just so desperate for nurses who we won't pay that we will take another Beverley Allitt? Can it happen again? I personally stand with the nurses. I think they should be paid more. Not really what this video is about, But hopefully if we did pay people more and we didn't rely on external services for people to take up the nursing shifts, such as agencies and so on and so forth, and just paid them correctly, we wouldn't have another one. But we did. It was this one.